Good afternoon, everybody. Very
Good
happy
afternoon.
to have you here for this panel. This panel is Wealth Creation Through Homeownership, and we will have a number of speakers join me here on the panel. We'll have Fred Johnson, who is the CEO of Neighborhood Development Foundation, Bonnie Moore, who is the director of the Department of Community Development for the city of Shreveport, and Ricardo Thomas, who is president of Thomas-Waddell and Associates. And I'm Charles West, president of Square Button Consulting and partner with Urban League of Louisiana on the Sea Change Collective, which you'll hear a little bit more about as we proceed through this panel. So happy to have you all here this afternoon, and really excited to jump into the conversation that we have here. You heard this morning some of our philanthropic panelists talking about building assets in Black and Brown communities, and that serving as infrastructure for social equity and justice. Well, we're here to talk about one of the key assets that have helped to drive wealth in America for a long time, and that's homeownership, really, as one of the primary ways, and frankly the most common pathway to generational wealth in America. It's one of the three levers for the Urban League of Louisiana's Sea Change Collective. Unfortunately, we've seen homeownership rates among African Americans, though, declining, hitting levels that haven't been seen since the 1960s. And so the panelists that I've introduced are here to discuss how potential homeowners can take steps towards becoming homeowners, but also what the policy context is and the policy levers that can be used to help close this persistent gap. And so I'll start out by asking each of our panelists some opening questions, and then we'll continue with our conversation. If any of you have questions that you'd like to offer up, feel comfortable putting them in the chat. I'll monitor the chat, and if I can, find time to work in your questions. But overall, we're just here, hopefully, to learn from each other. And so my first question is for Bonnie Moore. So first, can you start by sharing a bit about what's happening in Northern Louisiana related to homeownership? And in particular, I'm really interested to hear about some work that you said you guys are just starting that's really focused on ensuring generational transfer of home ownership.
Thank you for the opportunity to share with you today. It's a great conference, and I'm excited to be a part of this. In North Louisiana, the homeownership rates mirrors the country, with people of color disproportionately having the lowest homeownership rates. We also have some of the poorest census tracts in North Louisiana, and this is compounded by high unemployment and poverty rates, and this causes a lack of an affordable housing stock, diminished credit, little or no assets and savings, and lack of access to capital. In 2019, the median poverty value in Shreveport, property value was about $148,000. The homeownership rate was 52.7, but that was drastically different for people of color. And the unemployment rate for people of color in the MFA ranged from about 7.7%, 6%. However, for people that were not people of color, it was only 3.5%. And so due to this high unemployment rate and people of color having poverty rates from 20 to 30%, and those non-persons of color having poverty rates of about 8.2%, we can certainly see the challenge that we have for equity and wealth creation in our community. So we're working on a number of different initiatives. Some I will share a little later on. However, we really hone in on estate planning and wealth creation. So we received a small grant to work on estate planning because estate planning is tremendously important and is lacking for people of color. And we believe that's a driver behind wealth creation, particularly as we leave a legacy for our children, our children's children, and generational poverty and all of those things that is plaguing our communities. And also we're working on a number of different issues to build capacity in these low-income neighborhoods.
Thank you so much for give us the context of Northern Louisiana. Fred, you work with potential home buyers every day in the New Orleans area. What do you see contributing people's ability to buy and keep their homes so that they can transfer them to the next generation?
Well, thanks again for having us. And housing is such an important conversation because it shapes how we think, feel, and behave as individuals and families. April of this year, God spare, I will be at this business of teaching, training, and educating first-time home buyers for 36 years. We have been fortunate enough to create a process where sometimes better than others, we was creating 100 homeowners a year, but when we analyze the numbers, we about 99 homeowners a year, with some years stronger than others. And primarily it's education. The schools and churches and institutions we attend don't teach this, and it doesn't come by osmosis. And if you grew up in a house where you were fussed at or chastised because whatever you did, and then it told you the rent was due, well, you grew up in a rent environment and you didn't understand anything about mortgages. So we've created an environment that demystifies that process as best we can so that we could then explain to people, as long as you're paying the rent, you're paying somebody else's mortgage. And if you want to create an asset to pass on to your children, then we need to get you in the mindset to start thinking about how you're going to pay a mortgage for yourself as opposed to continuing to pay a mortgage for somebody else. So we take a really demystified process in this with regards to educating. The biggest problem we have right now is the education system, which causes folk to make less money, which creates a problem. And that problem causes them to afford less on the first mortgage, which means now we need much more subsidy to subsidize the housing. And then we have a system where we have to do better with the political arena so that they can better understand and stop coming to these very same people for votes, but not concerned about the quality of life they live in with respects to even the conditioning in the of the product, because everything is changing and these systems are much more scientific. So it ain't one thing, Mr. West. It's a gumbo of things, and we try to meet the client where they are. We don't run a welfare program, we run a self-help program, and we clearly state that homeownership is not for everybody. Homeownership comes in a three-pronged process. We identify it as rights, responsibilities, and privileges. And you can't take one without taking the other. So we create a 12-hour, at this time, virtual training. As soon as we get some better clarity on this COVID, we'll go back to in-person. But that has been the work of the Neighbor Development Foundation and the work of Fred Johnson for the past, God say the same, 36 years. And we try to meet the customer where they are, educate them so that they can have a better appreciation for how to manage what little they have, because we're always working we're always doing a lot with a little. So we try to explain them. My job specifically is to get them ready to go in to get money, because none of this works without money. And
so that's actually a great transition. Say nothing works without money. So
nothing works without money.
Ricardo, you work to help people make sure that they have the money that they need to invest in homes and other things. And so in particular, I'd love to hear from you, your perspective on this obstacle that many people face of having enough money saved up for a down payment. And if you have thoughts about ways that potential homeowners through both, their own activities, but also through, some of the other resources that may be available, how they can really get themselves financially prepared for homeownership.
Well, first, thank you, Charles. I certainly consider it a privilege to be a part of the panel discussion today, and certainly both of the prior panelists have mentioned many of the systemic issues as it relates to the barriers of home ownership. In my work as a financial advisor, I come to the discussion with a little bit different perspective, because I certainly agree that financial education or financial literacy is absolutely critical, which I will get into a little bit more. But then it's not just talking about it, it's about being about it, the execution side of it. And what do I mean by this? Let me first go back to the financial literacy side. We realize that a home purchase for most, if not all of us, will be one of the biggest purchases we will make in our lifetimes. That being said, we should not go into it impulsively, meaning we need to be prepared. Part of that preparation is also being realistic about what we can afford at that particular time. And what do I mean by that? I'm meaning that our first house may not be the Taj Mahal. Okay, so we have to take baby steps. We have to take one step at a time and work our way up to ultimately that dream home. Now, how do we do that? In particularly, your question was, how do we come up with the money? Well, number one, when we're talking about or unpacking the topic of wealth creation, we should realize is that we should not just be beginning to save money or putting money aside when the thought comes into our mind that we want to purchase a home. There's an old saying that my grandma and folks used to say all the time, pay yourself first. So you should always be accumulating money. And I know we don't have enough time to talk about all of it today, but there is a big distinction between saving and investing. And so what I'm getting at with this is this. We know there's another old saying that you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. So when you're talking about, and Fred mentioned about getting people in the right place to be able to get money, well, it's almost like dating or courting. You're preparing yourself when you go into that lender. So you, or as a real estate agent would tell you, if you put your house up on the market, you have to stage that house so it can be more attractive to a potential buyer. Well, the same thing applies to you. You have to stage yourself to make yourself more attractive to a potential lender. So that homework includes, number one, realistically looking at what your budget can afford. It goes beyond whether or not I can afford the house note, but all of the additional costs that go with it, the property tax, the maintenance, the insurance, all of those things of that nature. In addition to that, I should do the homework to determine what type of financing that I qualify for, and in turn, what type of financing is the property of interest is eligible for. So that's part of that homework process as well. When we're talking about accumulating the funds, certainly we hope, putting my financial advisor hat on, that we don't have to invade our retirement account to come up with the down payment for the home. That should be a totally separate pot of money that you're going to with that. So if you're doing your homework and understanding the different types of financing, whether you qualify for FHA or VA or conventional, and realizing that the amount of money or the percentage that you have to come up with can range anywhere from a low of 3% with VA to a high of 20% with conventional, then you can put the numbers down and prepare yourself accordingly so that, and let us not forget about the importance of credit as well, so that when we walk into that lender's office, we're not going in with hat in hand, say, oh, please do me a favor. But now you're going in from a position of power and strength and saying, okay, I know I've prepared. I know I have the adequate down payment for whatever loan type that I qualify for. I've already addressed any potential issues with my credit score. And so now I'm doing them a favor because I'm bringing my business to them. And if I can't get what I want, I've prepared myself in such a way that I can take my business elsewhere. So just to summarize, it starts with doing the homework and understanding realistically what we can afford, what our situation is credit-wise, how much money we should have available for the type of lending that we qualify for, and then presenting ourselves in such a way so that we can really get a house that's realistic to our budget, so that we can really enjoy home ownership and not having to work 2 and 3 jobs just to pay for it, and not being able to stay at home and enjoy the comforts of having that home.
Thank you so much. All three of you, sort of from different lenses, have really focused on the different ways in which potential homeowners can prepare themselves. But my team at Square Button, as a part of the Sea Change Collective, produced a landscape scan where we looked really in depth at home ownership. And there's an entire collection of factors that play into whether people are able to own homes. There are things like high housing costs, which certainly accelerated during the pandemic, but didn't originate there. There are supply constraints, which some more market-based and some more resource-based. There's inadequate income and wages, in particular among our Black and Brown community, that's really driven by the structure of our economy. And then there, in addition to all of those things, which frankly are themselves racialized, there are more overt things that you see when you see disparate lending based on race. You see disparate valuations put on homes in Black and Brown communities. And so you see race clearly playing a part into who is deemed creditworthy, into who then gets to own a home and the value of that home once they have it. And so I'd really like to hear from any or all of you, more specifically, what kind of actions you'd like to see to increase access to home ownership for communities of color and to sustain the values of homes that are owned in communities of color.
I'll swing at it from the standpoint of what's needed to create more home ownership. As I said earlier, Mr. West, that one of the things that I see, and let me just say, most of my clients of female African-American ladies, head of household, 2 children, somewhere between $24,000 and $28,000 of income. But one of their saving graces is that they get a lot of, in some cases, a lot of earned income money at the end of the year. And that money can help as a foundation to help them to clean up credit, build credit. And I have some different processes I've used that showed them somewhat how to use the OPM system, the other people's money system, and not spend the money. But what I find over the years is that because of systemic racism, every time we move, the system moves further away. So sales prices are quite naturally going out the stratosphere. And because of the quality, the poor quality of education we have, it allows us to be a low wage earner, which means it allows us to qualify for less, which means now we need more subsidy. So one of the things that the political arena could do is to see to it that there is more of the taxpayers' dollars put back into subsidizing first-time home buyers, home ownership, and subsidizing it from a standpoint of it's again, money moved with right responsibilities and privileges. And in any case, we always going to advocate and educate that you don't get in over your head, as Mr. Thomas said. And we pull a pre-merge credit report. It's a soft pull, and we go line by line, item by item, with respects to, we can't make people do anything, but we encourage you to, and you have a right to make the final decision, because all of this is, as I named it, you have two DNAs. You have a medical DNA, you have a financial DNA. Your social security number is your financial DNA, and anybody's gonna loan you any serious money, it's gonna follow that, what's reported on that mortgage credit report, not all them other fly-by-night reports. So we we go very in-depth. We go as deep as your mind could take you with respect to that individual. And we try to give them an environment and of thought processes that take them out of the them and us. But the number one thing we face is education dictates income, income dictates how much you're gonna get on the first mortgage. And it's the federal government responsibility to step up for working people who pay their taxes, and they don't have time to chase all of these bills because they're too busy trying to put food and milk and shelter over their head. And those of us who were born and reared in New Orleans, we now see rent is going out the stratosphere. I mean, there's some rents that are equal to or better than what a mortgage is. So again, my perspective on it is that, and the other side to this is that the data shows the stronger the homeownership neighborhood is, in most cases, the less the crime, especially the crime that we think about, the better the school systems are, the better the parks, the better the libraries. So the quality of life is better. And then one of the things I always say about New Orleans is because we have such a high rate of rental and a low rate of home ownership. When I started, it was 70% rent, 30% owned. And I think we made some gains, but we went back down. But you notice people here throw stuff out the window all the time. And I associate that with the fact that because you don't own something, you don't have something to appreciate. And if you own something and you understood the value of what you own, and you know to throw something out the window, you're throwing something in front of somebody else's door. So my job has been to make it as simple, stupid, and put it right where the customer needs it. We, as I said, we run a 12-hour home buyership training program, and that brings in the inspector, the appraiser, the lender, the closing attorney, the assessor, the real estate agent, the insurance agent, because we want them in this room of theory to have a real appreciation for what happens when they get in the real world and when they meet these various aspects of resources and sources as to how to handle themselves and how they should be handled, and not to get ripped off and not to get bamboozled. And in addition to that, what I say to all of my customers is, I'm not commissioned. I don't work on commission. I'm gonna get paid if you buy a house, I'm gonna get paid if you don't buy a house. So I'm not trying to sell you something. One of the problems we have is that a lot of times our people don't know what's good and what's bad because there's so much coming at them, and then they get taken. So that's my reply. That's not all of what you asked, but that's my reply to some of what you asked about.
If I were to kind of get in on some of that, and certainly there was a lot packed in that question there, Mr. West, as it relates to the challenges and obstacles. I would say that we have to be more intentional as it relates to a partnership, a public and private partnership. We know as a community, our buying power is tremendous, which means we should be able to hold big business, the corporate community, the banking community, more accountable to what our needs are, because we're spending our money and they're making money off of our backs. So as we talk about all these different challenges in the question here, all of the different challenges and obstacles, as both of the other panelists mentioned, this is where certainly like conferences like this help to bring to light the awareness of what the problems are, but more importantly, let's come up with the solutions and start to reach back out into the community, especially into the business community, and say, hey, you are making money off of our backs, off of our shoulders. What are you contributing to make the situation better as opposed to making the situation worse? And so by being able to come together, put together a plan, and identify maybe our top 3 or our top 5 asks, because we can't solve the problems of the world overnight or in a day, and then start chipping away at it one by one, and doing periodically a progress or a scorecard, progress report to say, well, okay, now that we have this public-private partnership, these are the priority issues that we set out to attack. What type of progress have we made on those? And then as we check those off, then we can move to the next ones, because there is no simple answer, because there are so many complexities to it. But I think being more, like I said, intentional as it relates to the business community, I think that will help a lot in getting the resources that are necessary for our community.
So Bonnie, we've heard a response that centered on federal policy and really using our tax dollars to better subsidize. We've heard a response that focuses heavily on our banks and other businesses really playing their part to increase home ownership. What's your thoughts about specific actions that you'd like to see to increase Black and Brown home ownership and also retention in particular? As one of our participants put in the chat, and also retention of homes.
Response is going to be from the frame of reference of community development and seeing this over a 25-year period, seeing what works, what does not work. Also looking at all of those things that have created racial inequity, such as redlining and the lack of resources, the lack of education, all of those things. But access to sustainable home ownership can be obtained through fiscal assistance, housing counseling, sound lending practices, flexible underwriting, and ensuring the ability to pay back, because we definitely do not want the recession of 2008 to happen again. And also backing FHA mortgages, insurance. So my friend Ellen popped up something. We need to incentivize home ownership because we have done an excellent job of incentivizing rental. And that's why you see so much more rental than you do home ownership. We would also like to see the utilization of vacant land and blighted buildings and homes, because when you go into our inner city neighborhoods, that property value is much less than a property value across town. And so we would like to incentivize those vacant properties, bring them back into commerce. I know here in Shreveport, we have about 89,000 housing units. That's apartments, homes, vacant houses, group facilities, and 10,000, almost 11,000 of those are vacant. We can bring those properties back into commerce and create incentives for our homeowners to take advantage of that as well. I'd like to see a clear database. I don't know if we have one in other cities across the state. I know we don't have one for the state of Louisiana or Shreveport, but a clear database of vacant land and lots that can be accessed by potential developers or homeowners that are at below market value for our homeowners. I'd also like to see more incentives around homeownership and subsidies for not just homeowners, but developers and contractors. I'd like to see more capital for down payment assistance, closing costs, interest rate buy downs, and things of that nature. And we would like to see the Louisiana Housing Trust Fund funded in a way that promotes residential development, whether it's homeownership, whether it's rental, but we like to see that trust fund activated. And we would also like to see more local housing trust funds. I know we don't have one here in Shreveport, but the parish is developing one, and also a homeownership fund, and take advantage of the CARES Act and the ARP monies in a way to develop homeownership and wealth creation for our people of color.
Thank you. A long list of levers that we have at our disposal and would love to see many of them come to fruition. I want to really hone in on this point that was raised in chat. Many of the resources we discussed were really about what it takes to get people into homes. But this conversation, that's only the first step, because we're talking about generational wealth, which means certainly that we are getting people into homes, but that we're seeing them able to keep those homes, maintain those homes, natural maintenance, and also, in the face of disasters and other sorts of events that we've realized. There have been a couple efforts around the country in different places to use either framed as reparations or otherwise to allow Black homeowners public resources to maintain their homes or to even renovate their homes. What actions would you like to see, and specifically thinking about policy or public actions, what kind of actions would you like to see that really help people stay, not just own their homes, but to keep them and to renovate them, to maintain them, so that they're passing on to the next generation a more valuable asset?
If I can start with that one there, I want to go back to what Ms. Moore said from the beginning. I was very excited to hear about their initiatives in Shreveport on estate planning, because when we talk about wealth creation, or the current popular word, creating generational wealth, well, if we don't have our ducks in a row now, then there will be nothing or very little to pass on. And what do we mean by that? I mean, if we take into context what has happened in the last 2.5 years with the pandemic, or even still, we all know we live in Hurricane Alley down here. If I can go through a very quick scenario, how often do we find when grandma dies, no succession is done, some other family member just moves in, the paperwork is not updated, here comes the hurricane, destroys the house, the adjuster comes out and says, yes, you have a legitimate claim, but when they cut the check is still in grandma's name. Why? Because nobody took care of business. Okay, and therefore you can't get the house repaired. So that goes back to what Ms. Moore said about the importance of estate planning. And we know culturally that can be a very difficult conversation in our community, where folks will say, oh, well, I don't want to talk about death, you must be trying to kill me. But that's a natural evolution or part of life. And if we want to be able to pass on these assets that we've worked and sacrificed so hard for, we have to put it in writing. We have to have wills. You don't have to be on Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous to have a will. Okay, or take, for instance, here with COVID, look at how many times, or I should say, for the first time, we were not able to go into the hospital with our loved ones to advocate on their behalf. So yeah, they may still be alive, but if they're not in a capacity to make decisions, and what I'm getting at here is having powers of attorney to be able to handle, financial aspects and so forth. So a lot of the problems that we encounter of being able to transfer wealth from one generation to the next can be easily eliminated by sitting down and, number one, becoming educated, and understanding the importance of estate planning and understanding that, oh, just because you mentioned it to one sibling or the other, that's not good enough. It has to be in writing, and they have to know where the documents are. You know, oftentimes we'll say, well, I don't want anybody to know my business. Well, everybody's going to know your business when the sheriff is there to sell it, because nobody wants to pay the property tax or whatever else with it. So I think it starts with education and estate planning, and realizing that's how we can truly build wealth. Because when you look at the historically wealthy families in this country, a lot of that was built off of real estate, and then being able to pass on those legacies from generation to generation by putting trust together, wills, and so forth. So you really hit a hot button for me there. But thank you, Ms. Moore, for what you all are doing in Shreveport in that area.
Bonnie, Fred, do you have other thoughts about ways that we can help people to keep their homes and to increase the value of that asset that they're transferring to the next generation?
Education, education, education. And we have to have a process, as someone said earlier, that's deliberate and intended, so that we can drive the message. Like all these other dumb messages get driven, we need to be able to have a format that, like them dumb songs they play on the radio we don't like, and before you know it, we humming it and singing it. It's called a commercial. What we get educated in this country by repetition. We need to take these very important matters and create a source of repetition for them, so that it's so repetitious that even the children start asking about it, because that's how it happens. That's how it happens. And we either get educated by reading, or we get oral. One of those two will get us. And we have to be able to recognize there was some of us gonna read and some of us not, but we want to create a net that's gonna cast in as many of us as it possibly can, because the matter is too serious. And to stop this wealth from staying in that family is very disheartening. And how do we stop it? If it's not taught in the schools and churches and institutions, it doesn't come by osmosis. So we have to go where they are. Put it on the TikTok, put it on to this, put it on to that, put it in mediums where it began to make them have a conversation about it. Because this is how you stop and turn this derogatory process around. You gotta recognize all of the various formats that is reachable to the clientele or the potential clientele that we're trying to reach. We got to take it where they are.
Ricardo, I chuckled a little bit when you said not wanting everybody to know your business. When my grandmother passed, I was the grandson who knew the business and had to take care of it. So I was the one who drove around to the 3 different banks that she had and knew where the documents were and handled all the paperwork that was needed. So that part really resonates with me and my experience. But then I was the only one who knew. And so if I didn't, then what? Right. Bonnie, I'd like to come to you. So, home ownership can be made affordable to people at almost any income level with the right financial products, with the right assistance. And so I wonder your thoughts about policy solutions that might be out there that would really make homeownership more equitable.
And I do want to kind of speak to your last question too. Low appraisal values are very prevalent for people of color in many communities. And there, it kind of lends to a little redlining when they go to the lenders and they can't get a rehab loan. They can't get their house refinanced because the appraisal value is so low. So I do think there needs to be a tremendous amount of advocacy on that level. But as it relates to policy, I think we need to continue to enforce and evaluate CRA requirements on banks. We got to continue to do that. We can't assume that we've come a long ways, but we also have a long ways to go. Credit unions need to be held accountable for lending to people of color. And also, we need to use some of the national nonprofit funders to sell to the banks on a secondary market who could be really a whole lot more flexible in their lending requirements. And then in 2 to 3 years, they'll sell it on the secondary market. Also, we need to develop a mortgage trust fund to fund mortgages with public-private partnerships. And there should be a policy on a statewide level. Ricardo said it, we need to think of this as a state issue and not a Shreveport issue, a New Orleans issue, a Baton Rouge issue, a Monroe issue. And then we need financial education should be required, not just for buying a house, but also required as you graduate from high school or you graduate from college. It should be a requirement because that is education. And we need to evaluate the regulatory and zoning challenges that face us as well. They can be considered predatory in a lot of ways. But as it relates to some of the homeowners having funding, we've got to realize that Louisiana is a very impoverished state. Until we create some anti-poverty strategies, until we can address employment for the underemployed and the underemployed, we're going to have the situations that we have today. So this needs to be very comprehensive in our conversation. We need to be able to talk to our political leaders and others about how do we increase incomes? How do we address the poverty in our issues? We deal a lot with the elderly. We may rehab their house this year and 5 years from now, they're back again because of deferred maintenance. So how do we address those things in a way that makes sense for everyone in our community? Those are some of our challenges, and we need to talk about these on a very more comprehensive level and a political level.
Ricardo, I saw you nodding. Did you have some thoughts about that also?
No, I'm basically amening everything she said. She hit it on the head. She's absolutely correct.
Thank you. Thank you. So one of the issues that's been raised in the chat is that, you know, as we raise the value of people's homes, there are then attendant costs that comes with that, in particular taxes, but also others. Are there ways that we can both help people raise and retain the value of their homes while also mitigating a bit against some of those higher costs that might be associated with that?
Well, I'll just say this, that's the double-edged sword there, because certainly we all realize, and I think Ms. Moore said it earlier, that in our communities, many times our homes are undervalued and not appraised for what they are or what they should be. But here's the other side of that equation. So if all things being equal, if we are now getting the proper valuations of our properties and homes and so forth, here's the baggage that comes along with that, and that's increases in property taxes. So you can't get one without the other. And so I don't know if there's an absolute answer or solution with that, because on the one hand, yeah, you want your property to appreciate, because in the grand scheme of things, we're talking about wealth creation. So yeah, you want that property, you know, to go up over the years in case you decide to sell it or pass it on or whatever. But the flip side of that equation from the standpoint of the local county or a municipality, as those values go up, They want to collect more property taxes to be able to keep up, to do all of these things that need to be done, and including that laundry list of things that Ms. Moore mentioned. That's where some of that funding comes from. So from my experience, I don't know if there's a perfect answer to that, because you can't get one without the other. I can't say I'm going to, I want my house to appreciate, but I don't want the taxes to go up there with it. I mean, it's kind of all in the same equation, so hopefully the other panelists may have some solutions that I hadn't thought of with that.
One thought came to mind for me. We, on the state level, we have restoration tax abatement, quality jobs, enterprise zone for businesses, where you freeze the taxes for 5 years, and then you can freeze it for another 10 years. Now, you still got to pay taxes. They're just frozen at the level you were paying. Why can't we do that for residential in certain areas? They do it in historical areas, disadvantaged areas. Why can't we promote doing that for residential developments?
I think the answer is clearly we can. We just need the will,
Yes.
right? And this is where equity really plays in. We need to see who it would benefit and feel that it's important enough to do it. So as we start to near the end of our panel, each of you are working sort of in different areas of all the solutions that are required to move people towards homeownership. You're working in different geographic areas. What are the resources that homeowners and maybe even also developers should be looking for in their communities that would help them promote more home ownership for people of color? And Bibani, we start with you.
I'll say for developers, we have to create the infrastructure for developers to come in our community. I say all the time, why would somebody come to our inner city neighborhoods when they can go to Southeast Shreveport and make $200,000 off of a home? And so we have to create the infrastructure, and that means the vacant property that I was talking about, the subsidies, all of those things that will make it affordable for not only the homeowner, but profitable for that developer and that contractor. I forgot the other question.
So, and for homeowners, what kind of resources should homeowners be looking for?
Oh, absolutely. We have a happy program here, and we call it happy because we want you to be the happy at the end of it, but it's Homeownership Assistance Participation Program Initiative. And we allow for down payment assistance, closing costs, principal reduction, which we buy down the cost of the house to be affordable to that person, and also the interest rate buy down and closing costs. And so with that, we're working on creating a capital infusion to cut down the cost to build, to make it affordable for anyone. Again, we never want to reinvent 2008. And so we need to make the housing affordable for those to live in. Mm-hmm. And also, I just want to say, we don't believe in building low-income housing. We believe in building housing that anyone will live in.
Ricardo, what are your thoughts? What are the resources that an aspiring homeowner, a potential homeowner, should look for to help them on their path to homeownership?
I would say, and I'm going to steal from Mr. Johnson, what he said earlier, it starts with education, educating yourself about the resources that your local municipality has. And I mean, it can start as simply as having your local elected official holding community meetings and making you aware of various programs. I can't tell you how often I run into people when we mention certain programs, soft seconds and, different things like that. So, I didn't even know that was available. And you're saying, well, how can that be? You know, knowledge is power. And so I think the most important resource is that we have to be proactive, find out what's there, because not all the time, I should say, do we have to reinvent the wheel. Many times we're not maximizing the resources that are there. Now, we realize, we've all confirmed that today, that there are many obstacles and challenges. But I mean, that's just been since the beginning of life. But you know, hold our elected officials accountable, have them to come to the community. It was mentioned earlier about the churches. Hold those meetings at the churches and say, well, look, whether it's every quarter or every month, come back and let us know. There's a new program coming in, you know, community block grants or this, that, and the other, soft seconds, things like that. The more knowledge we have, the more informed we are, the better financial decisions we can make, and the better our communities are overall as a whole. So I would say it starts with education and finding out what types of resources that are literally in your backyard in whatever municipality that you're located in.
So in the chat, we actually have a particular question about a pool of resources that there's been a lot of discussion about at this conference, which is the American Rescue Plan Act funds and the infrastructure bill funds. Are there any ways that those funds in particular could be used to provide the kind of resources that are needed to help with home ownership?
I want to jump in on that, and what happens is at the very top of this, when you call these categories of monies, that doesn't help the buyer on the ground, because what we need is the political leadership to create an environment where the money is easy to access, and in most cases, that's always a stumble and fumble. And it gets to be much more complicated than what it should ever be. The truth of the fact is the best way to spend that money is to give that money to your 501c3s, who can do a much better job at making certain the money go where it's intended and timely than what these bureaucracies and these municipalities can do, because I don't know, they're tied up. But to piggyback on your earlier question to the other two panelists, I'm in agreement with both of them. I think that one of the things we need to stop doing is we need to stop trying to reinvent the wheel, and we need to look around at what's working best. Everything don't work everywhere the same way. But if you take a little bit of this and a little bit of that and put it together, I think we can save time, money, and energy and be much more productive in terms of moving forward and moving people forward who want to be moved. Again, as Mr. Thomas said, money and fools will soon part. And like anything else, there are people who are waiting to take advantage of first-time home buyers. So you want them to be endowed in an education environment that don't only just educate them, but counsel on their behalf, and they can come back for advice and direction. Because buying a house is the biggest ticket item they will ever buy. And the more they know about what they're doing, the better they can protect their money. We have seen developers, we have seen lenders, when the client is getting the first mortgage and then they get another soft second for 65 when the money was good or better, and they get a closing cost for 10, we've seen predatory behaviors where they start increasing the cost of what was $3,000 is now $6,000. What was a $180,000 house, now it went to $195,000 house. So wherever there's money, there's always going to be some misbehaviors. Jesus turned the temple out because the money changers was fast counting the people. So I'm saying we don't have the luxury of trying to reinvent all of this, Mr. West. What we need to do and what we need this panel in this whole series of conversations to do is look at the best of the best, pull it together, and then make it go. Because whatever we're doing, we're going to be always fighting discrimination. And discrimination is what got us behind this 8 ball in the beginning when, you know, HUD created the rule that, no, you can't buy over here, but you can buy over there. And the white people got a chance to have 40 to 80 years of building assets. And we were stuck behind a cement company at a dump where our property turned slow. So we don't have, I want to make certain we understand here. We don't have the convenience of time to keep talking and talking and talking and talking and trying to create something new. We have enough history and we have enough do well and do good that if we pull aspects of this together for across the state. And I've been in the state where I heard the LAC people argue about, well, the prices are too damn high in New Orleans. Well, and then when you match up what they want you to build, they're sure these people are born. Well, you can't build a barn in the city. You can do that in the house. So I'm saying to you, first thing we need to not forget, this is, we find ourselves in this conundrum because of a systemic racism that persists. And the smarter we get, the slicker it gets. So we need to understand how to bring those of us who's been boots on the ground and have a delivery system and pull this information together and see how we can format that and go forward. Because this is a gumbo effect. Some of everything gonna have to go in it. Everything. No stone is to be unturned. All the politicians who come for the votes, they gotta ante up. All the banks that make money, they gotta ante up. All of the insurance companies that sell policies, they gotta ante up. Everybody is profiting off of this process. But the poor people, they don't have time to read all this, guys. They got to put milk and bread and food and shelter, and they work in 2 jobs. So it is those of us who understand what this is about, how to demystify it and be able to present it and let those who want it take it and those who don't.
I appreciate you grounding us always in certainly the discrimination that has created the context in which we're in and continues and persists till today to create the disparities. Also urging us to move with urgency to execute strategies to increase the number of homeowners that are ready to make it easier to pass down wealth through homeownership, to increase the amount of homes that are available, and also to ensure that we're passing on valuable assets. Across all those strategies, I think we've touched on different levers, different policies and practices to help us do that. Thank you all of our panelists for your time. I appreciate Fred Johnson, Bonnie Moore, Ricardo Thomas, all for sharing your thoughts, your wisdom, your expertise with us, and really hope that we all take to heart this charge that we just received, that we pull all of that together to really start to make the kind of change that we want to see using homeownership in particular as a lever to increase wealth in our Black community. Thank you all, and hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Hope you enjoy the rest of the content at this policy conference.
Thank you.